Question 1. Benchmark analysis indicates that firearm instructors in Washington state are tasked with certifying individuals on the safe handling of semi-automatic rifles. Considering the legal and ethical obligations, what is the most appropriate course of action for an instructor when a student consistently demonstrates difficulty with safe unloading procedures, even after multiple attempts and additional instruction, and has a scheduled certification appointment the following day? Option A. Certify the student immediately to avoid disappointing them and to maintain a positive client relationship, with the understanding that they will practice unloading at home. Option B. Proceed with certification only after the student successfully demonstrates proficiency in safe unloading procedures, regardless of the scheduled appointment, and document the need for further practice. Option C. Issue a conditional certification, allowing the student to possess the firearm, but requiring them to complete remedial training within 30 days. Option D. Expedite the certification process by focusing on other, more easily demonstrated skills and assuming the student will improve their unloading technique over time. Correct answer is B. Proceed with certification only after the student successfully demonstrates proficiency in safe unloading procedures, regardless of the scheduled appointment, and document the need for further practice. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a firearm instructor to balance the legal mandate of ensuring proficiency with the ethical responsibility of not compromising safety standards for expediency. The instructor must navigate the specific requirements of Washington state law for semi-automatic rifle safety training certification, while also considering the individual learning pace and potential safety risks associated with a student who is struggling. The pressure to certify a student, perhaps due to scheduling or client expectations, can create a conflict with the paramount duty of public safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves adhering strictly to the Washington state requirements for firearm safety training certification for semi-automatic rifles. This means ensuring the student demonstrates proficiency in all mandated areas, including safe handling, loading, unloading, clearing malfunctions, and the principles of safe firearm storage, as outlined by Washington state law. If the student fails to meet these standards after reasonable instruction and attempts, the instructor must ethically and legally withhold certification. This approach is correct because it directly fulfills the regulatory obligation to certify only those who have met the established safety benchmarks, thereby protecting public safety and upholding the integrity of the certification process. It aligns with the ethical duty of care owed to the student and the community. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves certifying the student despite evident safety concerns and a lack of demonstrated proficiency in critical areas. This fails to meet the Washington state legal requirements for certification, which are designed to ensure a minimum standard of safety knowledge and skill. Ethically, this action constitutes negligence and a breach of the duty of care, potentially endangering the student and others. Another incorrect approach is to significantly shorten the training duration or skip essential modules to accommodate the student's schedule or perceived lack of aptitude. This violates the spirit and letter of Washington state's firearm safety training mandates, which specify the content and duration necessary for effective learning. It prioritizes convenience over safety and undermines the purpose of the certification. A third incorrect approach is to provide a conditional certification without the student meeting all requirements, perhaps with a promise to follow up later. Washington state law does not provide for conditional certifications in this context. This misrepresents the student's qualifications and creates a false sense of security, which is both legally noncompliant and ethically irresponsible. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical responsibility. This involves 1. Thoroughly understanding the specific legal requirements of Washington state for semi-automatic rifle safety training certification. 2. Assessing each student's performance against these objective standards, not subjective timelines or external pressures. 3. Providing clear, constructive feedback and additional instruction when a student struggles, within the bounds of the law and safety protocols. 4. Making the difficult but necessary decision to withhold certification when safety standards are not met, documenting the reasons thoroughly. 5. Maintaining professional integrity by refusing to compromise safety for expediency or client satisfaction. Question 2. Strategic planning requires a firearm instructor in Washington state to consider how to best manage a client's request for semi-automatic rifle firearm safety training certification when the client expresses a desire to expedite the process due to an upcoming trip, suggesting they have prior experience and only need a brief review, which approach best aligns with Washington state's regulatory framework for firearm safety training certification. Option A. Provide an abbreviated training session that covers only the core concepts the client seems most interested in, omitting less critical topics to save time. Option B. Issue a partial certification or a waiver for specific modules based on the client's self-assessment of their prior experience and understanding of firearm safety. Option C. Certify the client based on their verbal confirmation that they have sufficient knowledge and experience without requiring the completion of all practical exercises or course modules. Option D. Strictly adhere to the full Washington state mandated curriculum for semi-automatic rifle firearm safety training, ensuring all required topics are covered and proficiency is demonstrated before issuing certification, regardless of the client's stated experience or urgency. The correct answer is D. Strictly adhere to the full Washington state mandated curriculum for semi-automatic rifle firearm safety training, ensuring all required topics are covered and proficiency is demonstrated before issuing certification, regardless of the client's stated experience or urgency. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a firearm instructor to balance the immediate need for a client to obtain certification with the absolute requirement to adhere to Washington state's firearm safety training regulations for semi-automatic rifles. The instructor must navigate potential client pressure or misunderstanding of the law while upholding their professional and legal obligations. Failure to do so can result in legal penalties for the instructor and the client, and more importantly, compromise public safety by certifying individuals who have not met the mandated training standards. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves strictly adhering to the Washington state requirements for semi-automatic rifle firearm safety training certification. This means ensuring the client completes the full curriculum as mandated by Washington law, which includes specific topics and a demonstration of proficiency. The instructor must verify that all required elements of the training have been successfully completed by the client before issuing the certification. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with Revised Code of Washington RCW 9/41/280, which outlines the minimum requirements for firearm safety training for individuals seeking to possess certain firearms, including semi-automatic rifles. Ethically, it upholds the instructor's duty to ensure competent and safe firearm handling, thereby promoting public safety. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves issuing a partial certification or a waiver based on the client's prior experience or perceived understanding. This is a regulatory failure because Washington state law specifies a defined curriculum that must be completed. Prior experience does not exempt an individual from the mandated training, and issuing a certification without full completion violates RCW 9/41/280. Ethically, it undermines the purpose of the training, which is to ensure a baseline level of knowledge and skill for all certified individuals. Another incorrect approach is to provide a simplified or abbreviated version of the training that omits key components required by Washington state law, even if the client expresses satisfaction with the shortened version. This is a direct violation of the regulatory framework. The law does not permit instructors to deviate from the prescribed content. Ethically, this approach prioritizes expediency over safety and legal compliance, potentially leaving the client with critical knowledge gaps. A third incorrect approach is to certify the client based solely on their verbal assurance that they have learned enough or understand the concepts, without requiring the practical demonstration of skills or completion of all course modules as stipulated by Washington state regulations. This bypasses the essential assessment component of the training mandated by law. It is a regulatory failure, as it does not meet the statutory requirements for certification, and an ethical failure, as it compromises the integrity of the certification process and public safety. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and public safety above all else. This involves 1. Thoroughly understanding the specific legal requirements of the jurisdiction, in this case, Washington state firearm laws and training mandates. 2. Clearly communicating these requirements to clients upfront. 3. Implementing a standardized training protocol that ensures all mandated components are covered and assessed. 4. Resisting any pressure to deviate from these standards, even if it means a client cannot immediately obtain certification. 5. Documenting all training activities and client progress meticulously. This systematic approach ensures that professional conduct remains ethical and legally sound. Question 3. Strategic planning requires a firearm dealer in Washington state to consider how to best manage the documentation of semi-automatic rifle safety training certifications. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with Washington state law and upholds professional responsibility? Option A. Accepting a trainee's verbal confirmation that they have completed a firearm safety course without obtaining any written documentation or records. Option B. Meticulously documenting the completion of the Washington state-mandated firearm safety training for semi-automatic rifles, including details of the training provider, date of completion, and trainee information. Option C. Accepting any firearm safety training certificate presented by a customer, irrespective of whether it specifically addresses semi-automatic rifles or was issued by a recognized training entity. Option D. Assuming that possessing a federal firearms license, FFL, negates the need to verify state-specific training certifications for semi-automatic rifles. The correct answer is B. Meticulously documenting the completion of the Washington state-mandated firearm safety training for semi-automatic rifles, including details of the training provider, date of completion, and trainee information. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a firearm dealer in Washington state to navigate the specific requirements for certifying individuals on the safe handling of semi-automatic rifles, a category with distinct safety considerations and regulatory oversight. The dealer must balance efficient business operations with a strict adherence to Washington state law, ensuring that training is not only provided but also properly documented, and that the training itself meets the mandated standards. Failure to do so can result in legal penalties, loss of business, and, more importantly, compromised public safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously documenting the completion of the Washington state-mandated firearm safety training for semi-automatic rifles. This approach ensures that the dealer has a verifiable record demonstrating compliance with RCW 9/41/280, which outlines the requirements for such training. By maintaining detailed records of the training provider, date of completion, and the trainee's information, the dealer creates a robust audit trail. This proactive documentation is crucial for demonstrating due diligence to law enforcement and regulatory bodies, thereby mitigating legal risks and upholding the integrity of the firearm sales process in Washington state. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves relying solely on the trainee's verbal assurance of having completed a training course without any independent verification or record keeping. This fails to meet the statutory requirement for proof of training and leaves the dealer vulnerable to accusations of non-compliance. Washington state law necessitates a tangible demonstration of training completion, not mere self-attestation. Another incorrect approach is to accept any firearm safety training certificate, regardless of whether it specifically covers the safe handling of semi-automatic rifles as required by Washington law, or if it was issued by an unverified entity. This approach disregards the specificity of the law, which mandates training tailored to the safe operation of semi-automatic rifles. Accepting generic or unqualified training certificates constitutes a direct violation of the statute. A third incorrect approach is to assume that a federal firearms license, FFL, automatically exempts the dealer from the state-specific training certification requirements for semi-automatic rifles. While an FFL is a federal requirement, it does not supersede state laws like those in Washington concerning firearm safety, training for specific types of firearms. Dealer must comply with both federal and state regulations. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should adopt a systematic approach to compliance. First, thoroughly understand the specific requirements of Washington state's firearm safety training laws, particularly concerning semi-automatic rifles. Second, establish clear internal procedures for verifying and documenting all training certifications, ensuring they meet the state's criteria. Third, maintain organized and accessible records that can be readily presented for inspection. Finally, stay informed about any updates or changes to relevant legislation to ensure ongoing compliance. Question 4. The performance metrics show a significant decline in the successful completion rate of the Washington State Firearm Safety Training Certification for semi-automatic rifles among new applicants. As the lead instructor, what is the most responsible and legally compliant course of action to address this trend? Option A. Blame the declining completion rates on a lack of student preparedness and suggest that applicants should be required to pass a preliminary knowledge assessment before enrolling in the course. Option B. Increase the pace of instruction and the amount of material covered in each session to ensure all topics are addressed within the allotted time, assuming students will catch up on their own. Option C. Recommend to the state that the passing score for the certification be lowered to improve completion rates. Option D. Conduct a thorough review of the training curriculum and delivery methods, analyze student feedback and common error patterns, and implement targeted revisions to improve clarity and comprehension of Washington State's specific firearm safety requirements. Correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough review of the training curriculum and delivery methods, analyze student feedback and common error patterns, and implement targeted revisions to improve clarity and comprehension of Washington State's specific firearm safety requirements. Explanation. The performance metrics show a concerning trend in the completion rates of the Washington State Firearm Safety Training Certification for semi-automatic rifles. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts public safety and the legal compliance of firearm owners. A trainer must balance the need for thoroughness with the practical realities of student engagement and accessibility, all while strictly adhering to Washington state law. The best approach involves a comprehensive review of the training materials and delivery methods to identify specific areas where students are struggling, followed by targeted improvements. This includes analyzing feedback, observing training sessions, and consulting with subject matter experts to ensure the content is clear, accurate, and effectively communicated, directly addressing the requirements of Washington's firearm safety training standards. This proactive and data-driven method ensures that the training meets legal mandates and genuinely enhances the safety knowledge of participants. An approach that focuses solely on increasing the volume of material covered without assessing comprehension or engagement is flawed. This fails to address the root cause of low completion rates and may even exacerbate confusion, leading to less effective training and potential noncompliance with Washington State's intent for the certification. Another unacceptable approach is to assume that the students are solely responsible for their lack of completion, without examining the training's efficacy. This overlooks the trainer's responsibility to deliver effective instruction and fails to identify potential shortcomings in the curriculum or teaching methods, which is a critical ethical and professional failing in an educational context. Finally, an approach that involves simplifying the material to the point where it no longer fully covers the essential safety information required by Washington state law would be a direct violation of the certification's purpose and legal requirements. This prioritizes completion numbers over genuine safety education. Professionals should employ a continuous improvement framework. This involves regularly assessing training effectiveness through various metrics, soliciting feedback from participants and instructors, and staying abreast of any changes in Washington state firearm laws or best practices in firearm safety education. When performance dips, the first step should always be an internal review of the training program's content and delivery, rather than externalizing the problem or making superficial adjustments. Question 5. The evaluation methodology shows that when considering the requirements for firearm safety training certification for semi-automatic rifles in Washington state, what is the most appropriate interpretation of the legal mandate for firearm safety training? Option A. A certificate issued by an instructor who has completed a basic firearm safety course, even if the training provided to the applicant did not cover Washington state laws or specific rifle safety. Option B. Any general firearm safety course that touches upon basic gun safety principles, regardless of whether it specifically addresses semi-automatic rifles or Washington state laws. Option C. Training that comprehensively covers safe firearm handling, secure storage, Washington state firearm laws, and specific operational safety considerations for semi-automatic rifles provided by a qualified instructor and resulting in a statutorily compliant certificate. Option D, a training program that focuses solely on the legal aspects of firearm ownership in Washington state, without practical instruction on safe handling or storage of semi-automatic rifles. The correct answer is C, training that comprehensively covers safe firearm handling, secure storage, Washington state firearm laws, and specific operational safety considerations for semi-automatic rifles, provided by a qualified instructor, and resulting in a statutorily compliant certificate. Explanation: the evaluation methodology shows that understanding the specific requirements for firearm safety training certification in Washington state, particularly concerning semi-automatic rifles, is paramount for responsible firearm ownership and public safety. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of Washington's revised code, RCW, pertaining to firearm safety, balancing individual rights with public safety mandates, and ensuring that training meets the precise legal definition of firearm safety training as it applies to semi-automatic rifles. Misinterpreting these requirements can lead to individuals obtaining certifications that are not legally valid, potentially resulting in legal repercussions for both the individual and the training provider, and undermining the intent of the law to promote safe firearm handling. The correct approach involves a thorough review of Washington state's RCW 941-280, which outlines the requirements for firearm safety training. This statute specifies that the training must cover safe firearm handling, storage, and the laws of Washington relating to firearms. For semi-automatic rifles, this would necessitate instruction on their specific operational characteristics, safe loading and unloading procedures, and common malfunctions, in addition to general firearm safety principles. The training must be provided by a qualified instructor and result in the issuance of a certificate that meets the statutory requirements. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to the legal framework established by Washington state, ensuring that the certification process is compliant and effectively promotes the intended safety outcomes. An incorrect approach would be to assume that a general firearm safety course, without specific modules addressing the unique characteristics and safe handling of semi-automatic rifles, is sufficient. This fails to meet the spirit and letter of the law, which implicitly requires training relevant to the type of firearm being certified for. Another incorrect approach would be to rely on a certificate from a training provider that does not explicitly cover Washington state firearm laws, as RCW 941-280 mandates such coverage. This oversight would render the certification invalid under state law. Finally, accepting a certificate from an unqualified instructor or a program that does not issue a formal certificate would also be a failure to comply with the statutory requirements. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a systematic process. First, identify the specific legal requirements of the jurisdiction, Washington State RCW 941-280. Second, verify that the training content and delivery method align precisely with these legal mandates, paying close attention to any specific provisions for different firearm types, such as semi-automatic rifles. Third, confirm the credentials of the training provider and the validity of the issued certificate. If any aspect is unclear or appears to deviate from the statutory requirements, further investigation or consultation with legal counsel specializing in firearm law is advisable before accepting or issuing a certification. Question 6. Regulatory review indicates that firearm dealers in Washington state must ensure individuals seeking to acquire semi-automatic rifles receive certified training. A dealer is considering offering a new training program. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with Washington state's firearm safety training certification requirements for semi-automatic rifles? Option A. Accept any firearm safety training certificate presented by a customer, regardless of its origin or specific content, as long as it appears legitimate. Option B. Offer a general firearm safety course that includes basic gun handling and storage principles, assuming it will adequately cover the nuances of semi-automatic rifles. Option C. Rely on a third-party training provider to manage the curriculum and certification, without independently verifying if their program specifically meets Washington state's detailed requirements for semi-automatic rifles. Option D. Develop and implement a training program that explicitly covers all Washington state mandated topics for semi-automatic rifle safety, including operation, safe storage, and handling, and ensure instructors are qualified and the certification process adheres to state guidelines. The correct answer is D. Develop and implement a training program that explicitly covers all Washington state-mandated topics for semi-automatic rifle safety, including operation, safe storage, and handling, and ensure instructors are qualified and the certification process adheres to state guidelines. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a firearm dealer in Washington state to navigate the specific requirements for certifying individuals on the safe handling and operation of semi-automatic rifles, while also considering the ethical implications of ensuring public safety and responsible firearm ownership. The dealer must balance business operations with strict adherence to state law, preventing potential legal repercussions and contributing to a safer community. Misinterpreting or neglecting any aspect of the training certification process can lead to significant legal penalties and damage to the dealer's reputation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously verifying that the training program offered by the dealer or any third-party provider they recommend fully aligns with the Washington state requirements for semi-automatic rifle safety training certification. This includes ensuring the curriculum covers all mandated topics, the instructors are qualified, and the certification process itself meets the legal standards set forth by Washington state law. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the legal mandate, prioritizing compliance and the safety of individuals acquiring and using these firearms. It demonstrates a commitment to responsible business practices and public safety, which are paramount in the firearm industry. Incorrect approach is analysis. Offering a training program that covers general firearm safety but omits specific modules on the safe handling, storage, and operation of semi-automatic rifles, as mandated by Washington state law, is a regulatory failure. This approach neglects the explicit legal requirements for this specific class of firearm, potentially leading to individuals being certified without adequate knowledge, thereby increasing safety risks and violating state law. Recommending a training provider without first confirming their curriculum and certification process meets Washington state's specific requirements for semi-automatic rifles, even if the provider is reputable for other firearm training, is an ethical and regulatory lapse. The dealer retains a responsibility to ensure that any training they endorse or facilitate is compliant, as they are a licensed entity operating under state law. This approach outsources due diligence, which is unacceptable when legal compliance and public safety are at stake. Assuming that a general hunter education course or a concealed pistol license training course automatically satisfies the requirements for semi-automatic rifle safety training certification in Washington state is a misinterpretation of the law. State regulations often have specific curricula for different types of firearms or training certifications, and a generic course may not cover the unique safety considerations pertinent to semi-automatic rifles. This approach risks certifying individuals who have not received the legally required specialized training. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a proactive and diligent approach to regulatory compliance. This involves thoroughly understanding the specific legal requirements for each type of firearm and training certification. When in doubt, seeking clarification from the relevant state authorities or legal counsel is advisable. A robust internal process for vetting training programs and instructors, coupled with ongoing education on evolving regulations, is essential for maintaining both legal standing and ethical responsibility. The primary focus should always be on ensuring that all training meets or exceeds the minimum legal standards to promote responsible firearm ownership and enhance public safety. Question 7. Performance analysis shows that a firearm safety instructor in Washington state is conducting a certification course for semi-automatic rifles. One trainee, who has extensive experience with bolt-action rifles, expresses confidence in their ability to handle the semi-automatic rifle safely, but struggles to articulate the specific safety considerations unique to semi-automatic actions during the theoretical portion of the training. How should the instructor proceed to ensure compliance with Washington state firearm safety training certification requirements? Option A. Conduct a thorough practical skills assessment focusing on the safe handling, loading, unloading, and storage of a semi-automatic rifle, and verbally confirm the trainee's understanding of specific safety rules related to its operation, in addition to the theoretical knowledge. Option B. Ask the trainee with a verbal warning about potential safety issues, emphasizing that the instructor trusts their general familiarity with firearms to mitigate risks. Option C. Focus primarily on the theoretical knowledge portion of the assessment, asking detailed questions about firearm mechanics, and assume that practical skills will be developed post-certification. Option D. Certify the trainee based on their extensive prior experience with other types of firearms, assuming their general knowledge of firearm safety will transfer effectively to semi-automatic rifles. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough practical skills assessment focusing on the safe handling, loading, unloading, and storage of a semi-automatic rifle, and verbally confirm the trainee's understanding of specific safety rules related to its operation, in addition to the theoretical knowledge. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a firearms safety instructor in Washington State who is responsible for certifying individuals on semi-automatic rifles. The challenge lies in balancing the strict requirements of the Washington State Firearms Safety Training Certification with the diverse learning needs and prior experiences of trainees. Ensuring that all trainees, regardless of their background, meet the minimum safety standards mandated by law, while also fostering a positive and effective learning environment, requires careful judgment and adherence to regulatory guidelines. The instructor must be vigilant in assessing comprehension and practical application of safety principles, not just rote memorization. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive assessment that directly evaluates a trainee's understanding and application of the specific safety rules for semi-automatic rifles as outlined by Washington state law. This includes observing their ability to safely handle, load, unload, and store the firearm, as well as their knowledge of the fundamental principles of firearm safety, such as muzzle control, finger off the trigger, and identifying the target and what is beyond it. The instructor must confirm that the trainee can demonstrate these skills and articulate the reasoning behind them, aligning with the spirit and letter of the Washington State Firearms Safety Training requirements. This approach ensures that the certification is a true indicator of safe firearm handling. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to certify a trainee based solely on their self-reported prior experience or general familiarity with firearms, without a direct, hands-on demonstration of proficiency with a semi-automatic rifle and knowledge of Washington state-specific safety protocols. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement for a standardized assessment of competency and could lead to the certification of individuals who may not fully grasp the nuances of semi-automatic rifle safety as mandated by Washington law. Another incorrect approach would be to focus exclusively on theoretical knowledge, such as asking questions about firearm components or general safety rules, while neglecting to assess the practical application of these principles in a simulated or actual handling scenario. Washington State's certification process emphasizes practical skills and safe handling, and an overemphasis on theory alone would not fulfill this requirement. A third incorrect approach would be to pass a trainee who demonstrates some understanding, but exhibits minor safety lapses during the practical assessment, with the rationale that they are close enough, or that the instructor can provide additional informal guidance later. This undermines the integrity of the certification process and violates the principle of ensuring a high standard of safety for all certified individuals, as required by Washington state law. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and public safety. This involves 1. Thoroughly understanding the specific legal requirements for the certification in Washington state. 2. Designing and implementing an assessment that directly measures the skills and knowledge mandated by those regulations. 3. Objectively evaluating each trainee against these established standards, without bias or subjective leniency that compromises safety. 4. Documenting the assessment process and outcomes to ensure accountability and provide a record of compliance. Question 8. Quality control measures reveal that a firearms safety instructor in Washington state is being asked by a student to certify them for semi-automatic rifle possession, claiming they have extensive prior experience and only need a formality to complete the process. The student is eager to bypass the practical handling demonstrations and the written knowledge assessment, suggesting they already know everything required. Which of the following actions best upholds the instructor's professional and legal obligations in Washington state? Option A. Issue the certification after the student signs a waiver acknowledging they have received sufficient training, as their prior experience is evident. Option B. Insist on the student completing the entire approved Washington State Firearm Safety Training course, including all practical demonstrations and knowledge assessments, as mandated by state law, regardless of their claimed prior experience. Option C. Provide a shortened, informal review of key safety points and then issue the certification, as the student appears competent. Option D. Waive the practical demonstration portion of the training, as the student's verbal assurance of proficiency is sufficient. The correct answer is B. Insist on the student completing the entire approved Washington State Firearm Safety Training course, including all practical demonstrations and knowledge assessments, as mandated by state law, regardless of their claimed prior experience. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a firearm safety instructor in Washington State. The challenge lies in balancing the legal requirement for certification with the ethical obligation to ensure genuine understanding and competency, especially when dealing with a student who may be attempting to circumvent the spirit of the law. The instructor must navigate the specific requirements of Washington's firearm safety training for semi-automatic rifles while upholding safety standards and preventing the issuance of a certificate to someone who hasn't truly grasped the critical safety principles. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves requiring the student to complete the full, approved Washington State Firearm Safety Training course, including all practical demonstrations and knowledge assessments, regardless of their prior experience or perceived familiarity with firearms. This approach is correct because Washington state law mandates that individuals seeking to possess a semi-automatic rifle must complete a certified firearm safety training program. The purpose of this training is not merely to acknowledge ownership, but to instill a deep understanding of safe handling, storage, and operation, which is crucial for preventing accidents and ensuring responsible firearm ownership. A certified instructor's duty is to verify that the student has met these specific educational and competency requirements as outlined by the state, not to make subjective judgments about their existing knowledge. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to waive certain components of the training, such as the practical demonstration of safe handling or the written knowledge test, based on the student's assertion of prior experience. This fails to comply with Washington State's specific training requirements, which are designed to ensure a baseline level of competency for all individuals. Ethically, it compromises the instructor's responsibility to ensure public safety by certifying someone who has not demonstrated proficiency through the mandated curriculum. Another incorrect approach is to issue the certification solely based on the student's willingness to sign a form acknowledging they have received training, without verifying actual comprehension or practical skill. This bypasses the core purpose of the certification, which is to confirm that the individual has successfully completed an approved training program and understands its content. It also violates the instructor's professional obligation to accurately assess and certify competency according to state law. A further incorrect approach is to provide a condensed or refresher course that deviates from the approved curriculum, even if the instructor believes it covers the essential points. Washington State has specific requirements for what constitutes approved firearm safety training. Any deviation risks rendering the certification invalid and failing to meet the legal standard. This approach prioritizes expediency over strict adherence to regulatory mandates, which is unacceptable when public safety is at stake. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should adopt a decision-making process that prioritizes strict adherence to regulatory requirements and ethical obligations. When faced with a situation where a student claims prior knowledge, the professional should first consult the specific statutes and administrative rules governing firearm safety training in Washington State. The next step is to clearly communicate the mandatory components of the approved training program to the student, emphasizing that completion of all required elements is non-negotiable for certification. If the student is unwilling or unable to complete the full program, the professional must respectfully decline to issue a certification, explaining that it is due to the inability to meet the state's legal requirements. This process ensures compliance, upholds safety standards, and protects the professional from potential legal and ethical repercussions. Question 9. The monitoring system demonstrates that a firearm instructor in Washington State is reviewing the certification application of an individual who claims extensive prior experience with semi-automatic rifles but has no formal training certification. The instructor is considering whether to modify the standard training and assessment process for this applicant. What is the most appropriate course of action for the instructor to ensure compliance with Washington's firearm safety training requirements for semi-automatic rifles? Option A. Ensure the applicant completes the full, state-approved firearm safety training course and passes all mandated assessments, regardless of prior experience. Option B. Allow the applicant to bypass the formal training curriculum and only complete a shortened, informal review of safety principles. Option C. Issue a certification based on a brief interview and observation of the applicant handling a firearm, assuming their prior experience is sufficient. Option D. Waive the practical skills assessment portion of the training, as the applicant's stated experience suggests they can handle the firearm safely. The correct answer is A. Ensure the applicant completes the full, state-approved firearm safety training course and passes all mandated assessments, regardless of prior experience. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a firearm safety instructor in Washington state who is responsible for certifying individuals to possess semi-automatic rifles. The challenge lies in balancing the strict requirements of Washington's firearm safety training law with the need to ensure genuine understanding and responsible firearm handling by the applicant, especially when faced with an applicant who appears to have prior knowledge but lacks formal certification. The instructor must adhere to the mandated curriculum and assessment methods, while also making a professional judgment about the applicant's readiness to pass the certification. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves strictly adhering to the Washington state requirements for firearm safety training certification for semi-automatic rifles. This means ensuring the applicant completes the full, approved training course, which includes both theoretical instruction and a practical skills assessment, as mandated by Washington law. The instructor must verify that the applicant has met all statutory requirements, including demonstrating proficiency in safe handling, storage, and operation of a semi-automatic rifle, and passing any required written or practical examinations. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the legal mandate to ensure all individuals certified possess the necessary knowledge and skills to safely handle these firearms, thereby promoting public safety and fulfilling the instructor's legal and ethical obligations. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to waive parts of the required training or assessment based on the applicant's perceived prior knowledge or experience. This is a regulatory failure because Washington law specifies a mandatory curriculum and assessment process that cannot be arbitrarily bypassed. It also poses an ethical risk by potentially certifying an individual who has not demonstrated mastery of all required safety protocols, undermining the purpose of the certification. Another incorrect approach is to issue a certification solely based on a brief observation of the applicant handling a firearm, without administering the full, standardized practical skills assessment. This is a regulatory failure, as it bypasses the legally required assessment designed to evaluate specific competencies. Ethically, it is irresponsible as it does not provide a reliable measure of the applicant's ability to safely operate and store the firearm, potentially leading to unsafe practices. A third incorrect approach is to rely on informal discussions or a verbal quiz to gauge the applicant's understanding of firearm safety, without following the prescribed curriculum and assessment methods. This is a regulatory failure because Washington law requires a structured training program and specific assessment criteria. It is also an ethical failure as it substitutes a less rigorous, non-standardized evaluation for a process designed to ensure a baseline level of safety knowledge and skill for all certified individuals. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role must adopt a decision-making process that prioritizes legal compliance and public safety. This involves thoroughly understanding the specific requirements of Washington's firearm safety training laws, including the approved curriculum and assessment methods for semi-automatic rifles. When faced with an applicant who claims prior knowledge, the professional should verify if that knowledge can be formally recognized through an equivalency process, if one exists within the regulations, or if the applicant must still complete the mandated training and assessment. The default position should always be to adhere to the prescribed training and assessment to ensure all individuals meet the minimum safety standards. Documentation of the training provided and the assessment results is also crucial for accountability. Question 10. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need for clarity regarding the minimum duration of firearm safety training for semi-automatic rifles in Washington state. A training provider is developing a new curriculum and needs to accurately calculate the total minimum hours required by law, ensuring it includes the specified live fire component. Based on Washington State Revised Code, RCW 941-280, which mandates a minimum of 5 hours of training including at least 1 hour of live fire training, what is the correct calculation for the total minimum required training hours? Option A, 4 hours. Option B, 5 hours. Option C, 6 hours. Option D, 7 hours. The correct answer is C, 6 hours. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in accurately calculating the required training hours for a firearm safety course, specifically for semi-automatic rifles in Washington state, while adhering to the statutory requirements. Misinterpreting the law or miscalculating the hours could lead to a certification that is not legally valid, potentially exposing the training provider and the trainee to legal repercussions. The challenge lies in precisely applying the statutory minimums and understanding how different components of the training contribute to the total required time. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a meticulous calculation of the minimum required training hours based directly on the Washington State Revised Code, RCW, concerning firearm safety training for semi-automatic rifles. This approach requires identifying the specific RCW sections that mandate minimum hours for classroom instruction and live fire training. For semi-automatic rifles, RCW 941-280 mandates a minimum of 5 hours of training, which must include at least 1 hour of live fire training. Therefore, correct calculation is to sum these minimums. 5 hours total minimum plus 1 hour live fire minimum equals 6 hours. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to the explicit legal mandates of Washington state law, ensuring the training meets the statutory requirements for certification. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves only considering the total minimum hours without accounting for the specific live fire requirement. This would lead to a calculation of only 5 hours, failing to meet the explicit mandate for at least 1 hour of live fire training as stipulated in RCW 941-280. This is a regulatory failure, as it bypasses a specific, legally required component of the training. Another incorrect approach might be to simply add the total minimum hours and the live fire minimum hours, without understanding that the live fire hour is already included within the total minimum hours specified by the statute. This would result in a calculation of 6 hours, total minimum, plus 1 hour live fire minimum, equals 7 hours. This is also a regulatory failure as it exceeds the statutory minimums without legal basis, potentially leading to unnecessary costs or time for trainees, and misrepresenting the legally required duration. A further incorrect approach could be to assume a standard training duration without consulting the specific RCW. For instance, if a provider typically offers a 4-hour course for other firearm types, applying that without verifying the specific requirements for semi-automatic rifles in Washington would be a significant regulatory failure. RCW 941-280 clearly outlines the minimums for this specific category of firearm. Professional reasoning. Professionals in firearm safety training must adopt a systematic approach to ensure compliance. This involves 1. Identifying the specific firearm type and the relevant Washington State Revised Code, RCW sections governing its safety training certification. 2. Carefully reading and interpreting the statutory language to understand all minimum hour requirements, including any specific components like live fire training. 3. Performing precise calculations based on these statutory mandates, ensuring no components are missed or double counted. 4. Documenting the calculation process and the basis for the training duration to demonstrate compliance if audited. 5. Staying updated on any legislative changes that might affect training requirements. Question 11. The efficiency study reveals that a significant number of individuals seeking firearm safety training certification for semi-automatic rifles in Washington state are struggling to grasp the nuances of safe storage requirements, particularly concerning preventing unauthorized access by minors. Considering this, which of the following training methodologies best addresses this identified deficiency and ensures compliance with Washington state law? Option A. Implement dedicated, in-depth training modules on Washington State's legal storage requirements for firearms, incorporating scenario-based learning to reinforce practical application and understanding of preventing unauthorized access. Option B. Briefly mention the general importance of safe storage during the training session, assuming trainees will independently research specific Washington State laws afterward. Option C. Provide a handout with links to various online resources for firearm storage laws, allowing trainees to explore them at their own pace. Option D. Focus the training exclusively on the mechanical operation and firing techniques of semi-automatic rifles, as this is the primary subject of the certification. The correct answer is A. Implement dedicated, in-depth training modules on Washington State's legal storage requirements for firearms, incorporating scenario-based learning to reinforce practical application and understanding of preventing unauthorized access. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals that a significant number of individuals seeking firearm safety training certification for semi-automatic rifles in Washington State are struggling to grasp the nuances of safe storage requirements, particularly concerning preventing unauthorized access by minors. This scenario is professionally challenging because firearm instructors have a dual responsibility: to impart knowledge of safe handling and to ensure compliance with Washington State law, which mandates specific storage practices to prevent accidents and illegal use. Failure to adequately address these requirements can have severe legal and ethical consequences, including potential liability, and more importantly, contributing to firearm-related injuries or deaths. The best approach involves a comprehensive and practical training methodology that directly addresses the identified knowledge gap. This includes dedicating specific, in-depth modules to Washington State's legal requirements for firearm storage, such as the use of trigger locks, gun safes, or locked containers, and emphasizing the importance of storing ammunition separately. Furthermore, the training should incorporate scenario-based learning, where trainees must identify and articulate the correct storage methods for various situations, reinforcing understanding through practical application and discussion. This aligns directly with the intent of Washington State's Firearm Safety Training Certification, which aims to promote responsible firearm ownership and reduce the risk of accidental shootings and unauthorized access. An approach that merely touches upon storage requirements without detailed explanation or practical application fails to meet the legal and ethical standards. This is because it does not adequately equip trainees with the knowledge necessary to comply with Washington State Revised Code, RCW 9/41/360, which outlines specific storage requirements to prevent access by prohibited persons, including minors. Such a superficial treatment of the topic constitutes a regulatory failure, as it does not ensure the trainee understands their legal obligations. Another inadequate approach is to assume that trainees will independently research storage laws after the training. While self-education is valuable, the certification process is designed to ensure a baseline level of competency and knowledge imparted by a certified instructor. Relying on trainees to seek out this information post-training shifts the burden of legal compliance away from the instructor's mandated role and can lead to gaps in understanding, representing an ethical lapse in fulfilling the instructor's duty of care. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on the mechanical operation of semi-automatic rifles, neglecting the critical aspects of safe storage as mandated by Washington State law, is fundamentally flawed. This overlooks a core component of firearm safety and responsible ownership, directly contravening the spirit and letter of the law designed to prevent harm. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding and application of all legal requirements. This involves a thorough review of the Washington State firearm laws relevant to the training being provided, identifying specific knowledge gaps through feedback or assessment, and designing training modules that are not only informative, but also practical and scenario-driven to ensure comprehension and retention of critical safety and legal information. Question 12. The assessment process reveals a trainee in Washington State has verbally answered all questions correctly regarding the safe unloading of a semi-automatic rifle. However, during a simulated unloading procedure, the trainee hesitates and appears uncertain about the proper sequence for manipulating the charging handle to confirm the chamber is clear. What is the most appropriate course of action for the instructor to ensure compliance with Washington State's firearm safety training requirements? Option A. Conclude that the trainee has met the training requirements based on their successful completion of the written portion of the assessment. Option B. Have the trainee demonstrate the complete unloading procedure, including the manipulation of the charging handle, to visually and physically confirm an empty chamber, while the instructor observes and provides corrective guidance as needed. Option C. Focus solely on the trainee's ability to identify the safety selector switch, assuming proficiency in other areas based on their correct verbal responses. Option D. Accept the trainee's verbal answers as sufficient evidence of understanding, as they have demonstrated theoretical knowledge of the unloading steps. The correct answer is B. Have the trainee demonstrate the complete unloading procedure, including the manipulation of the charging handle to visually and physically confirm an empty chamber, while the instructor observes and provides corrective guidance as needed. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a common challenge in firearm safety training, ensuring trainees understand the practical implications of safety features beyond mere mechanical operation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the instructor to gauge not just rote memorization of safety rules, but a deeper comprehension of how those rules translate into safe handling practices, particularly with semi-automatic rifles which have distinct operational characteristics. The instructor must assess the trainee's ability to apply knowledge in a simulated, yet realistic, context. The best approach involves the instructor observing the trainee's actions during a simulated loading and unloading sequence, specifically focusing on their manipulation of the charging handle and their awareness of the chamber status. This is correct because Washington State's firearm safety training requirements for semi-automatic rifles emphasize safe handling, including the proper manipulation of the action to confirm the firearm is unloaded. The training aims to instill habits that prevent accidental discharges. By observing the trainee's interaction with the charging handle and their verification of an empty chamber, the instructor directly assesses the trainee's practical application of safety protocols, aligning with the spirit and intent of the Washington State training mandate. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the trainee verbally reciting the steps for unloading the firearm. This fails to demonstrate practical competency. While verbal recitation shows knowledge of the steps, it does not guarantee the trainee can execute them safely and correctly under pressure or in a real-world scenario. Regulations require practical demonstration of safe handling, not just theoretical knowledge. Another incorrect approach is to focus only on the trainee's ability to identify the safety selector switch. While important, this is only one component of safe handling. A trainee might know where the safety is but still mishandle the firearm during loading or unloading, leading to a dangerous situation. The training must encompass a broader understanding of safe operation. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to assume that because the trainee successfully completed a written test on firearm safety, they possess adequate practical skills. Written tests are a component, but they cannot fully assess the kinesthetic and situational awareness required for safe firearm handling. The practical application of safety principles is paramount and must be directly observed. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes practical demonstration of safety over theoretical knowledge alone. This involves 1. Understanding the specific requirements of the jurisdiction, Washington State in this case, which mandates practical skills. 2. Designing training scenarios that directly test these practical skills. 3. Utilizing observational assessment techniques that focus on the trainee's actions and decision-making during simulated events. 4. Providing constructive feedback that reinforces safe practices and corrects any deviations. Question 13. Market research demonstrates a growing interest in semi-automatic rifle ownership in Washington State. A potential student approaches a certified firearm safety instructor, stating they have extensive experience hunting with various firearms and believe they are already proficient in safe firearm handling and operation. The student requests certification for a semi-automatic rifle without completing the full mandated training course, asserting their prior experience is sufficient. What is the most appropriate course of action for the instructor to take in Washington State? Option A. Automatically deny the certification request, citing the requirement for completion of a formal, structured training course as outlined in the state's regulations. Option B. Assess the student's knowledge and practical skills against the specific safety training requirements for semi-automatic rifles mandated by Washington State law to determine if their prior experience adequately covers all essential components. Option C. Issue the firearm safety training certification immediately, based on the student's self-assessment of their experience and proficiency, without any further evaluation. Option D. Waive the practical demonstration of safe handling and storage of semi-automatic rifles, accepting the student's claim of prior hunting experience as sufficient for these critical safety elements. The correct answer is B. Assess the student's knowledge and practical skills against the specific safety training requirements for semi-automatic rifles mandated by Washington state law to determine if their prior experience adequately covers all essential components. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a firearm instructor to navigate the specific requirements of Washington state's firearm safety training certification for semi-automatic rifles, while also considering the ethical implications of a student's prior experience. The instructor must balance the need to impart comprehensive safety knowledge with the responsibility to ensure all students meet the certification standards without creating undue barriers or compromising safety. The challenge lies in interpreting and applying the Washington state regulations accurately in a practical training context. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough review of the Washington State Firearm Safety Training Curriculum requirements for semi-automatic rifles, specifically focusing on the mandated topics and practical demonstration elements. The instructor should then assess whether the student's prior experience, even if informal, adequately covers the essential safety principles and operational knowledge required by the state's certification standards. If the student demonstrates proficiency in all mandated areas through observation or a brief, targeted assessment, the instructor can proceed with certifying them, provided all other legal requirements are met. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to the Washington state legislative intent of ensuring a baseline level of firearm safety knowledge and practical skill for individuals seeking to possess these firearms, while also being adaptable to a student's existing competence. It prioritizes compliance with the law and the safety of the individual and the public. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to automatically deny certification solely because the student has not completed a formal, structured training course, regardless of their demonstrated knowledge or experience. This fails to acknowledge that the law specifies training content, not necessarily a specific course provider, and could be seen as an arbitrary barrier to certification. Another incorrect approach would be to waive certain critical safety components of the training, such as safe handling or storage, based on the student's assertion of prior experience. This directly violates the spirit and letter of the Washington state regulation, which mandates specific training elements to ensure public safety. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to certify the student without any form of assessment of their knowledge or skills related to semi-automatic rifle safety, relying solely on their word. This would be a dereliction of the instructor's duty to ensure the student meets the certification requirements and poses a significant risk to public safety. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the governing regulations. In this case, Washington state's firearm safety training requirements for semi-automatic rifles. This should be followed by an objective assessment of the individual's demonstrated knowledge and skills against those regulatory requirements. If there are gaps, the professional should identify them and offer appropriate remedial training or assessment. The ultimate decision must be grounded in compliance with the law and a commitment to public safety, avoiding personal biases or overly rigid interpretations that could create unnecessary obstacles. Question 14. Compliance review shows that a firearm instructor in Washington state is conducting a mandatory firearm safety training certification course for semi-automatic rifles. One participant arrives without proof of completing the prerequisite online safety course, stating they will obtain it after the in-person session. What is the most appropriate immediate action for the instructor to take? Option A. Offer a provisional training session without the required documentation, explaining that certification can be applied retroactively. Option B. Immediately halt the training for that participant until they can provide valid proof of completion of the prerequisite Washington State Firearm Safety Training certification. Option C. Proceed with the training and advise the participant to obtain the certification after the course concludes. Option D. Allow the participant to continue with the training session and accept proof of completion at a later date. The correct answer is B. Immediately halt the training for that participant until they can provide valid proof of completion of the prerequisite Washington State Firearm Safety Training Certification. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a firearm instructor to balance the immediate need to provide training with the absolute legal mandate of ensuring all participants meet specific certification requirements. The instructor must act diligently to uphold public safety and legal compliance, even when faced with a situation that could potentially delay or complicate the training session. The core tension lies between efficient service delivery and strict adherence to Washington state law regarding firearm safety training for semi-automatic rifles. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately halting the training session for the individual who cannot produce the required proof of completion for the Washington State Firearm Safety Training Certification course for semi-automatic rifles. This approach is correct because Washington state law, specifically RCW 9/41/280, mandates that individuals must complete this specific training before purchasing or taking possession of a semi-automatic rifle. The instructor has a legal and ethical obligation to verify compliance before proceeding. By stopping the training, the instructor ensures no violation of the law occurs and upholds the integrity of the certification process. This proactive measure prevents potential legal repercussions for both the individual and the training provider, and most importantly, reinforces the safety and legal framework surrounding firearm ownership. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves allowing the individual to continue with the training while promising to provide the certification proof later. This is a regulatory failure because it directly contravenes RCW 9/41/280, which requires proof of completion before the training can proceed. It bypasses a critical legal safeguard designed to ensure responsible firearm acquisition. Ethically, it compromises the instructor's duty to uphold the law and promote safe firearm practices. Another incorrect approach is to proceed with the training and assume the individual will obtain the certification later, or to suggest they can obtain it after the course. This is a significant regulatory failure. The law is clear. The training must be completed and certified prior to the purchase or possession of the semi-automatic rifle. This approach creates a loophole that undermines the intent of the law, which is to ensure a baseline level of safety knowledge before individuals acquire these specific types of firearms. It also places the instructor in a position of facilitating a potential legal violation. A further incorrect approach is to offer a provisional training session without the required documentation, implying that the certification can be retroactively applied. This is a direct violation of the spirit and letter of Washington state law. The certification is a prerequisite, not a post-training formality. This approach demonstrates a lack of understanding or disregard for the legal requirements, potentially leading to the issuance of a certificate to someone who has not met the statutory prerequisites, thereby compromising public safety and legal compliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a decision-making process rooted in strict adherence to legal mandates and ethical responsibilities. When faced with a situation where a participant cannot immediately provide legally required documentation, the professional must prioritize compliance. This involves pausing the activity until the necessary proof is presented and verified. The decision-making framework should include 1. Immediate identification of the legal requirement, RCW 9/41/280. 2. Assessment of participant compliance with that requirement. 3. If non-compliant, immediate cessation of the activity that is contingent upon that compliance. And 4. Clear communication to the participant about the requirement and the necessary steps to fulfill it before proceeding. This systematic approach ensures that legal obligations are met, ethical standards are maintained, and public safety is prioritized. Question 15. System analysis indicates a firearm instructor in Washington state is preparing to conduct a mandatory safety training certification course for semi-automatic rifles. The instructor has extensive personal experience with advanced firearm techniques and is considering incorporating elements of this advanced training into the course, believing it will better prepare participants for real-world scenarios, even if these elements are not explicitly part of the state-approved curriculum. What is the most appropriate course of action for the instructor to ensure compliance and professional integrity? Option A. Strictly adhere to the Washington State mandated curriculum for semi-automatic rifle safety training certification, ensuring all required topics and skills are covered without deviation. Option B. Supplement the mandated curriculum with advanced tactical training and discussions on firearm modifications, as this provides a more comprehensive understanding of semi-automatic rifles. Option C. Prioritize teaching the technical specifications and operational nuances of various semi-automatic rifle models over the fundamental principles of safe handling and Washington State's legal requirements. Option D. Omit certain sections of the mandated curriculum that the instructor believes are less relevant to practical self-defense scenarios, focusing instead on the most critical safety aspects. The correct answer is A. Strictly adhere to the Washington State mandated curriculum for semi-automatic rifle safety training certification, ensuring all required topics and skills are covered without deviation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a firearm instructor to navigate the specific requirements of Washington State's firearm safety training certification for semi-automatic rifles, while also considering the ethical implications of providing training that might be perceived as insufficient or misleading regarding the nuances of legal ownership and use. The instructor must balance the need to adhere strictly to the mandated curriculum with the responsibility to ensure trainees understand the full scope of their legal obligations and potential risks. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously adhering to the Washington State mandated curriculum for semi-automatic rifle safety training certification. This approach is correct because it directly fulfills the legal requirement for certification, ensuring that trainees receive the specific knowledge and skills deemed necessary by the state legislature. By focusing solely on the approved curriculum, the instructor guarantees compliance with RCW 941-280 and related administrative rules, which define the scope and content of the required training. This ensures that all certified individuals meet the minimum state standards for safe handling, storage, and operation of semi-automatic rifles, thereby promoting public safety as intended by the law. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to supplement the mandated curriculum with advanced tactical training or discussions on circumventing certain firearm regulations. This is professionally unacceptable because it deviates from the scope of the required certification, potentially misleading trainees into believing they have received training beyond what is legally recognized or necessary for basic safety. It also risks introducing information that may be contrary to Washington state law, creating confusion and potential legal liabilities for both the instructor and the trainee. Another incorrect approach is to omit sections of the mandated curriculum deemed less critical by the instructor, such as detailed explanations of safe storage laws or the legal consequences of improper firearm handling. This is professionally unacceptable, as it fails to meet the minimum requirements set forth by Washington state law for certification. Omitting required content undermines the purpose of the certification, which is to ensure a baseline level of safety knowledge across all certified individuals. This could lead to unsafe practices and legal repercussions for trainees who are unaware of their full responsibilities. A further incorrect approach is to focus heavily on the technical specifications of various semi-automatic rifles without adequately covering the fundamental principles of safe firearm operation and Washington State's specific legal framework for their possession and use. While technical knowledge can be valuable, the primary objective of the certification is safety and legal compliance. Prioritizing technical details over core safety principles and legal requirements fails to equip trainees with the essential knowledge needed to operate firearms safely and legally within the state. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes strict adherence to regulatory requirements as the foundational element of their practice. This involves thoroughly understanding the specific statutes and administrative codes governing their certification area, such as Washington's RCW 941-280. Any deviation from the mandated curriculum, even with the intention of providing additional value, must be carefully evaluated to ensure it does not compromise legal compliance or introduce misinformation. Ethical considerations require that training be accurate, comprehensive within the legal scope, and focused on promoting genuine safety and responsible firearm ownership. Professionals should regularly review and update their understanding of relevant laws and best practices to ensure their training remains both compliant and effective. Question 16. Cost-benefit analysis shows that while accommodating eager learners can be beneficial, Washington State's firearm safety training certification for semi-automatic rifles mandates specific prerequisites. An instructor encounters a participant who wishes to enroll in the semi-automatic rifle course, but cannot immediately provide proof of completing the required foundational firearm safety training. What is the most appropriate course of action for the instructor to ensure compliance with Washington State regulations? Option A. Politely inform the participant that they cannot proceed with the semi-automatic rifle course until proof of the prerequisite training is provided, explaining that this is a mandatory requirement for certification under Washington state law. Option B. Advise the participant that the prerequisite can be waived for this specific instance, and the instructor will cover the foundational material during the semi-automatic rifle course. Option C. Allow the participant to begin the semi-automatic rifle training, but have them sign an affidavit acknowledging they have completed the prerequisite, with the understanding that proof will be provided later. Option D. Suggest the participant take a general firearm safety course instead, which may not meet the specific prerequisite for semi-automatic rifle certification in Washington state. The correct answer is A. Politely inform the participant that they cannot proceed with the semi-automatic rifle course until proof of the prerequisite training is provided, explaining that this is a mandatory requirement for certification under Washington state law. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a firearm instructor to balance the immediate need to provide training with the legal obligation to ensure all participants meet specific certification requirements. The instructor must assess the situation critically, recognizing that a failure to adhere strictly to the Washington state requirements for semi-automatic rifle safety training certification could have serious legal and ethical consequences, including potential liability and undermining public safety. The pressure to accommodate a participant who is eager to learn but lacks the necessary prerequisite can create a conflict between customer service and regulatory compliance. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves strictly adhering to the Washington state requirements for firearm safety training certification for semi-automatic rifles. This means verifying that the participant has successfully completed the required prerequisite training before allowing them to proceed with the semi-automatic rifle-specific course. The instructor must explain to the participant that the prerequisite is a mandatory component of the certification process, as mandated by Washington state law, and that they cannot be certified without it. This approach ensures compliance with all legal mandates, upholds the integrity of the certification process, and prioritizes public safety by ensuring all certified individuals have met the foundational safety knowledge. Incorrect approaches analysis. Allowing the participant to proceed with the semi-automatic rifle training without verifying completion of the prerequisite training is a direct violation of Washington state's firearm safety training certification requirements. This failure to comply with the law could result in the instructor's certification being revoked, fines, and potential legal liability if the untrained individual were to misuse a firearm. Ethically, it compromises the instructor's duty to ensure all certified individuals possess the necessary foundational safety knowledge. Suggesting the participant simply sign an affidavit stating they have completed the prerequisite without any independent verification also fails to meet the regulatory standard. Washington state law requires proof of completion, not self-declaration, for the prerequisite. This approach bypasses the established verification process, rendering the certification invalid and creating a similar risk of legal repercussions and compromised safety as the first incorrect approach. Offering to waive the prerequisite for this specific participant, even with the intention of covering the material later, is not permissible under Washington state law for certification purposes. The law outlines specific requirements for certification, and instructors do not have the authority to unilaterally waive these mandates. This action would result in an improperly certified individual, undermining the purpose of the training and exposing the instructor to legal and ethical penalties. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a decision-making process that prioritizes legal compliance and public safety above all else. When faced with a situation where a participant's eligibility is in question, the first step is to consult the specific regulations of Washington state governing firearm safety training certification for semi-automatic rifles. If there is any doubt about a participant meeting the requirements, the professional must err on the side of caution and seek clarification or require proof of compliance. The instructor's role is to enforce the law and ensure the integrity of the certification, not to create exceptions. Maintaining clear communication with the participant about the requirements and the reasons for them is also crucial for professional conduct. Question 17. Implementation of Washington State's Firearm Safety Training Certification for semi-automatic rifles presents instructors with the critical responsibility of ensuring all participants meet the established standards. An instructor is presented with a situation where a participant claims to have extensive prior firearm training from another state and demonstrates a high level of practical skill with a semi-automatic rifle, but has not completed the full Washington state mandated course. What is the most appropriate course of action for the instructor to ensure compliance with Washington state law? Option A. Refuse to issue a certification until the participant completes all required modules and assessments of the Washington State Firearm Safety Training course for semi-automatic rifles. Option B. Issue a certification after the participant verbally confirms they have reviewed the Washington State Safety Guidelines for semi-automatic rifles. Option C. Issue a certification based on the participant's prior training and demonstrated proficiency, assuming it meets equivalent safety standards. Option D. Provide a conditional certification, allowing the participant to possess a semi-automatic rifle while completing the remaining training at a later time. The correct answer is A. Refuse to issue a certification until the participant completes all required modules and assessments of the Washington State Firearm Safety Training course for semi-automatic rifles. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an instructor to balance the immediate need to provide training with the absolute legal mandate of ensuring all participants meet specific safety certification requirements. The instructor must navigate potential pressure from participants who may be eager to complete the training quickly, while upholding the integrity of the certification process and the safety of the public. Failure to adhere strictly to the Washington state requirements for semi-automatic rifle safety training certification can lead to legal repercussions for the instructor and potentially compromise public safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough review of all required documentation and a direct assessment of each participant's understanding and practical demonstration of firearm safety principles, specifically as they relate to semi-automatic rifles, before issuing any certification. This approach directly aligns with Washington State's legislative intent behind the Firearm Safety Training Certification, which is to ensure a baseline level of knowledge and competence to promote responsible firearm ownership and reduce accidents. The instructor must verify that each individual has successfully completed all mandated training modules and passed any required assessments, confirming their readiness to handle semi-automatic rifles safely. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves issuing a certification based solely on a participant's verbal assurance that they have completed similar training in another state or jurisdiction. This fails to meet Washington State's specific requirements, which mandate training and certification under its own framework. It bypasses the necessary verification process and disregards the unique aspects of Washington's safety standards for semi-automatic rifles. Another incorrect approach is to issue a certification to a participant who has demonstrated proficiency but has not completed the full duration of the mandated training course. This directly violates the requirement for comprehensive training and undermines the purpose of the certification, which is to ensure a thorough understanding of safety protocols. A further incorrect approach is to provide a conditional certification that allows a participant to possess a semi-automatic rifle while promising to complete the remaining training at a later date. Washington state law does not permit such conditional certifications for this specific training requirement. Certification must be earned in full before any privileges associated with it are granted. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role must adopt a decision-making process that prioritizes strict adherence to legal mandates and safety protocols. This involves understanding the specific requirements of the governing jurisdiction, Washington state in this case, meticulously verifying all documentation and practical demonstration, and resisting any pressure to circumvent established procedures. A commitment to thoroughness and integrity ensures both legal compliance and the promotion of public safety. Question 18. To address the challenge of a student in Washington state expressing significant anxiety and a desire to quickly complete their semi-automatic rifle safety training certification, what is the most appropriate course of action for the instructor to ensure compliance with state regulations and uphold safety standards? Option A. Allow the student to proceed with the certification process, focusing primarily on the test components, given their stated urgency and anxiety. Option B. Expedite the training by skipping certain modules or practical exercises that the student finds particularly challenging to accommodate their desire for a quicker completion. Option C. Rely on the student's self-reported understanding of the material and their assurance that they are ready to be certified. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive review of all required safety principles and operational procedures for semi-automatic rifles, verifying the student's understanding through questioning and practical demonstration before proceeding with certification. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive review of all required safety principles and operational procedures for semi-automatic rifles, verifying the student's understanding through questioning and practical demonstration before proceeding with certification. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an instructor to balance the immediate need for a student to complete training with the paramount importance of ensuring the student possesses the fundamental knowledge and skills necessary for safe firearm handling, specifically concerning semi-automatic rifles in Washington state. The instructor must assess the student's readiness without compromising safety standards or the integrity of the certification process. The challenge lies in discerning genuine understanding from rote memorization or superficial engagement, especially when a student expresses anxiety or a desire to expedite the process. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough assessment of the student's comprehension of all required safety principles and operational procedures for semi-automatic rifles, as mandated by Washington state law. This includes verifying their understanding of safe storage, handling, loading, unloading, and the specific safety mechanisms of semi-automatic rifles. The instructor must confirm that the student can articulate and demonstrate these concepts, not just recall them. This approach is correct because Washington's Firearm Safety Training Certification explicitly requires demonstrated competency and understanding of safe firearm practices, not merely attendance or a passing score on a test without true comprehension. The law prioritizes public safety, which is achieved by ensuring certified individuals are genuinely knowledgeable and responsible. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves allowing the student to proceed with the certification despite evident gaps in their understanding of critical safety procedures, such as the proper clearing of a semi-automatic rifle or the principles of safe firearm storage. This fails to meet the Washington state requirement for demonstrated competency and directly compromises public safety by certifying an individual who may not be adequately prepared to handle a firearm responsibly. Another incorrect approach is to solely rely on the student's self-assessment of their readiness or their stated desire to complete the training quickly, without independently verifying their knowledge and skills. This abdicates the instructor's responsibility to ensure the student meets the legal requirements and prioritizes expediency over safety, which is a violation of the ethical duty of care inherent in firearm instruction. A further incorrect approach is to focus exclusively on the written or practical test components, without addressing the student's underlying anxieties or misunderstandings. While testing is important, the instructor's role includes facilitating learning and ensuring comprehension. Ignoring a student's expressed difficulties or anxieties and simply pushing them through the assessment process without adequate support or clarification is professionally negligent and undermines the effectiveness of the training. Professional reasoning. Professionals in firearm safety instruction should adopt a decision-making process that prioritizes safety and legal compliance above all else. This involves 1. Clearly understanding the specific requirements of Washington state law regarding firearm safety training for semi-automatic rifles. 2. Actively assessing student comprehension through observation, questioning, and practical demonstration, not just relying on passive methods. 3. addressing student concerns and difficulties proactively, providing additional instruction or clarification as needed. 4. Maintaining a firm stance on not certifying individuals who do not meet the established safety and knowledge benchmarks, regardless of external pressures. This systematic approach ensures both legal adherence and the ethical responsibility to promote safe firearm practices. Question 19. The review process indicates that a Washington state resident who previously obtained a firearm safety training certificate that included instruction on semi-automatic rifles prior to the recent legislative amendment, is now unsure if their existing certification is still valid for possessing a newly acquired semi-automatic rifle. What is the most appropriate course of action for this individual to ensure compliance with Washington state firearm laws? Option A. Continue to possess the semi-automatic rifle, believing that their initial training was sufficient and that the new law is unlikely to be strictly enforced for individuals with prior certifications. Option B. Research the specific details of the recent legislative amendment to Washington state's firearm safety training requirements for semi-automatic rifles, including its effective date and any new curriculum mandates, to determine if their existing certification meets the updated standards or if additional training is necessary. Option C. Assume that their prior firearm safety training certificate, which covered semi-automatic rifles, remains valid as the core principles of firearm safety have not fundamentally changed. Option D. Seek advice from fellow firearm enthusiasts on online forums to gauge the general consensus on whether the new law impacts their existing certification. The correct answer is B. Research the specific details of the recent legislative amendment to Washington state's firearm safety training requirements for semi-automatic rifles, including its effective date and any new curriculum mandates, to determine if their existing certification meets the updated standards or if additional training is necessary. Explanation. The review process indicates a need to assess understanding of the practical application of Washington state's firearm safety training certification requirements for semi-automatic rifles, specifically focusing on the impact of a recent change in the law on an individual's training obligations. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to navigate a nuanced legal update and determine their personal compliance without direct legal counsel, highlighting the importance of accurate interpretation of statutory changes. Careful judgment is required to avoid potential legal repercussions. The best professional approach involves proactively seeking out and understanding the specific details of the new legislation concerning semi-automatic rifle safety training in Washington state. This includes identifying the effective date of the law, the precise nature of the updated training requirements, and whether the individual's existing certification remains valid or if additional training is mandated. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the legal obligation by engaging with the updated regulatory framework. Washington state law mandates that individuals seeking to possess a semi-automatic rifle must have completed a recognized firearm safety training course. When the law is amended, it is incumbent upon the individual to ascertain if their prior training meets the new standards or if further education is required to remain compliant. This proactive and informed stance ensures adherence to the revised Code of Washington, RCW, concerning firearm safety. An incorrect approach involves assuming that a previously completed firearm safety training course, even if it covered semi-automatic rifles, automatically satisfies the updated requirements without verifying the specifics of the new law. Failure to confirm compliance with the current statutory mandates could lead to a violation of Washington's firearm laws. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on informal advice from peers or online forums regarding the new training requirements. While these sources might offer insights, they do not constitute official guidance and can be inaccurate or incomplete, potentially leading to misinterpretations of the law. Finally, ignoring the legislative update altogether and continuing to possess a semi-automatic rifle without confirming current training compliance is a direct contravention of the law and carries significant legal penalties. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes direct engagement with official legal and regulatory sources when faced with changes in compliance requirements. This involves identifying the relevant legislative body or agency responsible for firearm regulations in Washington state, accessing official publications of new laws and amendments, and consulting official guidance documents. If ambiguity persists, seeking advice from a qualified legal professional specializing in firearm law is the most prudent step to ensure full compliance. Question 20. Examination of the data shows that a firearm safety training facility in Washington state offers semi-automatic rifle training. The facility has 48 weeks of operation per year, with 5 training days per week. Each certified training session for a semi-automatic rifle requires a minimum of 6 hours of instruction. If the facility has a total capacity of 8 hours of training per day, what is the maximum number of students that can be certified for semi-automatic rifle training in a given year, assuming each student completes the full 6-hour training requirement? Option A, 288 students. Option B, 240 students. Option C, 160 students. Option D, 192 students. Correct answer is D, 192 students. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the firearm instructor to accurately calculate the required training hours based on a fluctuating student enrollment and a fixed total training capacity. Miscalculation can lead to either insufficient training for some students, violating Washington state's firearm safety training requirements, or inefficient use of resources, impacting the business's profitability. The instructor must balance regulatory compliance with operational efficiency. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves calculating the total available training slots for the entire year and then determining the number of students that can be accommodated within those slots, ensuring each student receives the minimum required hours. This approach prioritizes regulatory compliance by guaranteeing that the total training hours delivered do not exceed the capacity, while ensuring all enrolled students can complete the mandated training. Specifically, Washington state law mandates a minimum number of hours for firearm safety training certification for semi-automatic rifles. If the total available training hours for the year are calculated and then divided by the minimum hours per student, this yields the maximum number of students that can be certified. By ensuring the number of enrolled students does not exceed this calculated maximum, the instructor guarantees compliance. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to simply divide the total available training days by the number of students enrolled without considering the minimum hours required per student and the total training capacity. This could lead to overbooking and an inability to provide the legally mandated training hours to all students. Another incorrect approach is to calculate the number of students based on the average number of training days per month without accounting for the total annual capacity and the minimum hours per student. This fails to consider the overall annual limit and could result in exceeding the total training hours the facility can offer. A third incorrect approach is to prioritize filling all available training slots without verifying if the total hours delivered will meet the minimum requirement for each student. This could lead to a situation where, even if all slots are filled, some students might not receive the full mandated training due to scheduling conflicts or an insufficient total number of training hours allocated for the year. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach this by first identifying the core regulatory requirement, the minimum training hours per student. Then they must determine the total available training capacity for the year. The calculation should be total annual training hours available / minimum training hours per student equals maximum number of students certifiable annually. This provides a hard limit. Any enrollment must be managed to stay within this limit, ensuring each student receives their required training. This involves proactive capacity planning and careful enrollment management.